sex trafficking, human degradation, and segregation. These were some of the evils of racism. Several decades after the law forbidding discrimination was passed, we're still in the presence of these gruesome realities. Today, I'm going to take you through the excruciating exploitation of Sarah Baartman to highlight these ugly truths. Although Sarah Baartman passed away on December 29, 1815, she was still the spectacle of the Western world until recently. Although she was from South Africa, until 1974, her brain, skeleton, and reproductive organs were on display in a museum in Paris. Only in 2002 were her bones returned and interred, which is a tragedy. She was paraded around freak shows in London and Paris, but today she's viewed as the representation and symbol of racism, colonial exploitation, and the denigration and commodification of black people. But how did a young, enslaved, and shy girl from South Africa end up in freak shows all across Europe? Why was her body publicly scrutinized, and why were her remains exhibited for 159 years? Sarah Baartman was born in the Eastern Cape in South Africa in 1789. Baartman and her family belonged to the cattle-herding group of the Khoi tribe and lived on a colonial farm where they performed domestic duties. Her father, a cattle driver, passed away when she was still a little girl, and her mother when she was just 2 years old. By the time she was a teenager, Baartman had married a drummer from the Khoi tribe. Together, they had a child who also died shortly after birth, which was before Dutch colonists killed Baartman's spouse when she was only 16. At this point, Sarah's life was already marked by traumatic events, and the most horrible years of her life hadn't even begun. Shortly after, she was brought into slavery by a merchant named Peter Willem Caesar. He took her to Cape Town, where he sold her to his brother Hendrik as a domestic slave. The once beautiful mother, who was in love with a caring husband, would have her entire life shattered from this moment on. Although she was unable to read, the 21-year-old Baartman was tricked into signing a contract on October 29, 1810, with a doctor named William Dunlop, who was a friend of the Caesar brothers. This obliged her to travel to England and Ireland with the Caesar brothers and Dunlop in order to serve as a domestic servant and to be on display for amusement. After 5 years, Baartman would be granted permission to return to South Africa and receive a percentage of the profits from her shows. Her captivity persisted for the rest of her life, confirming the fact that the contract was fake in every sense. On November 24, 1810, Baartman debuted in London in Piccadilly Circus. She was stage-named the Hottentot Venus because they saw her as an icon of primitive sexuality. However, British abolitionists were quick to take notice of her public treatment and accused Dunlop and the Caesars of holding Baartman against her will. Peter Caesar produced the contract that Baartman had signed, and the judge made a decision against Baartman. Moreover, Baartman affirmed in court that she wasn't being mistreated. Perhaps she'd been threatened, or she didn't see much of a future out there on her own. Either way, your guess is as good as mine. The court trial's media coverage raised Baartman's popularity as an exhibit. By 1812, she had traveled all over England and even as far as Limerick, Ireland. After spending 4 years in Britain, Baartman was transported to France in September 1814 and was sold to Esro, an animal exhibitor. He displayed Baartman to the general public in and around Paris, where crowds were enticed to look at her huge buttocks. And that's just a nice way of putting it. Actually, she was constantly harassed, and her body was touched and sexualized by the general public in the most horrendous way possible. Additionally, he permitted customers who were willing to pay to mistreat her sexually. This made Sarah one of the earliest black women documented to have been a victim of human sexual trafficking. At the age of only 26, Sarah passed away in Paris on December 29, 1815. She possibly died of an inflammatory illness like smallpox, syphilis, or pneumonia. Some people speculate that this might have been a result of her involvement in alcoholism and prostitution. Now, you'd think that with her death, the story of abuse would end. But after her death, many of her body parts would remain on display at the Museum of Man in Paris to perpetuate the racist ideas about people with African descent. Some of the bodily pieces were still there until 1974. It took a president's lobbying and her people's struggle to put an end to this abuse. Thanks to President Nelson Mandela of South Africa, who publicly asked for the return of Baartman's remains in 1994. Well, because of that, she was finally returned to her homeland in March 2002 and was buried in her birthplace. If Sarah's suffering was just a single occurrence, we would have forgotten about it, but her narrative is alarmingly similar to those of later generations of black women. How did it get to the space where people can so readily feel like they can touch me, or they can say things about my body, or fat shame me? Why does it seem like there's a permissiveness? Well, that permissiveness comes from someplace. It just didn't happen yesterday. It's got historical groundings that were incredibly violent. Dr. Gordon Chipimbere says about Sarah Baartman. In today's world, hypersexualized fetishist comments that are disguised as compliments are used on every representation of the African woman's large black body as either comedy material or the accessory of the day. Sarah Baartman was one of many coy women forced to strip off their clothing and make public displays of themselves for the perverted amusement of visiting European scientists. These researchers returned with the impression that these ladies were primitively and insatiably sexual. The mouth-breathing creep at the bar who leers at the black woman and makes suggestive confessions about never having been with a black girl before has managed to perpetuate this myth by adopting the idea that the black woman's sexuality is primitive, further dehumanizing them. Regardless of gender, the idea of entertainment has long been deeply ingrained in the white gaze of the black body. What might performing arts be without the large drawn-on lips and the black skin? How much funnier is it when the loud, obnoxious black female character in any comedy TV show is obese and frequently has dark skin? We become spectacles rather than people because of this sense of awe for the black figure. In Sarah Baartman's case, it was like a freak show. For many years, society has used the physical characteristics of black women to distinguish between what's normal, like white beauty, and what is abnormal, or beautiful black bodies. Before the black woman had the opportunity to love herself, they were destroyed. And although the black woman might not be able to alter how the world perceives them, they can rejuvenate their thoughts and learn to value the skin that they're born in. Due to the presence of external voices that told Baartman she was repulsive, she was unable to truly find the ability to love herself. Without self-love, a body that's been subjected to humiliation and abuse can never be a symbol of regard and admiration. So to all my beautiful women out there, of every size, every color, every walk of life, don't let the world kick you down. You're beautiful, I promise. So let me know what you think. Do you think the impact of racism on society is on the rise or is on a declining slope? How differently would her life have been if she had had help or been able or even dared to speak out in court? Let us know what you think in the comments below. In light of this story, our aim here is to share the life and times and stories of black people that history has abused or has tried to force us to forget. And we really appreciate you being willing to take this walk with us. And please, if you know the names, if you know the stories of black people that have been marginalized, that history has tried to glaze over, share it in the comments section with us below. We're always looking for untold stories to bring to light. And until next time, everybody, thank you very much for choosing to spend your time with us today. We'll see you in our next video.